A beautiful actress is found gone from this world in the mansion of a legendary music producer. That's not a movie plot. It's a true story from the dark side of rock and roll. You see, the catchy songs and cool outfits often hide some terrible secrets. We're counting down the stars whose actions were so out of line, they became truly evil. 1. Bill Wyman. The Rolling Stones were the ultimate rock and roll bad boys. They were known for their wild lifestyles and for pushing the limits. But what many overlooked is that one of their members, the quiet bass player, Bill Wyman, had a story that was deeply troubling. It involved a young girl named Mandy Smith. You see, Bill Wyman was already a grown man and a world-famous rock star in his 40s when he first met Mandy. The thing nobody tells you is that Mandy was only 13 years old at the time. Their relationship started then, when she was barely a teenager. It's a shocking fact that this wasn't just a rumor. Bill Wyman himself wrote about it in his own book. He openly admitted to starting a relationship with a middle schooler. To put it mildly, this was a huge scandal, but it somehow didn't stop his career. They even got married later on, as soon as she turned 18. The marriage itself was incredibly short, lasting only about 2 years. It's a wow factor that their age gap was a staggering 34 years. He was older than her own father. It's a dark part of rock history that shows how fame can sometimes let people get away with things that are just not right. This story of an older star with a very young girl is disturbing, but our next rocker took things even further by using his power to abuse his own wife, leading to one of the most famous escapes in music history. 2. Tommy Lee Motley Crue was the poster band for 80s rock excess. Their whole image was about being wild, loud, and out of control. The band's drummer, Tommy Lee, was just as famous for his antics off stage as he was for his powerful drumming on stage. His relationship with the famous TV star Pamela Anderson was constantly in the news. Many people saw them as a wild, passionate couple, but the thing nobody tells you is that behind the glamorous photos, there was a lot of turmoil. The fun and games came to a screeching halt when stories of physical arguments began to surface. It wasn't just yelling, it got much more serious. In 1998, Tommy Lee was held responsible for hurting Pamela. It wasn't just a simple argument. He physically went after her while she was holding their baby son. It was a terrifying moment that showed the dark side of their celebrity romance. For this, he had to spend time locked away, serving a 6-month sentence. What many overlooked is that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of out-of-control behavior that defined much of his life. Tommy Lee's actions hurt his own family. But what happens when a rock star's bad choices lead to the end of a stranger's life, and he barely faces any consequences? 3. Vince. Neil. Staying with the band Motley Crue, we turn to the lead singer, Vince Neil. With his long blonde hair and powerful voice, he was the frontman for one of the biggest bands in the world. They were famous for their party-hard lifestyle, and their motto seemed to be, anything goes. But in 1984, that lifestyle led to a terrible tragedy that changed lives forever. One evening, Vince was driving his fancy sports car in California. With him was his friend Nicholas Dingley, who was known as Razzle, the drummer for a band called Hanoi Rocks. The thing nobody tells you is that Vince had been drinking heavily. He lost control of the car and crashed head-on into another vehicle. The crash was devastating. Vince Neil survived, but his friend Razzle was not so lucky. His life was ended in the wreck. 2 people in the other car were also severely injured, suffering permanent brain damage. Here's the wow factor. For causing the passing of one person and seriously injuring 2 others, Vince Neil was sentenced to only 30 days in jail. He ended up serving just 19 of those days. Many people were outraged that a rich and famous rock star could get such a light punishment for such a serious event. Vince Neil's mistake had fatal consequences, but our next musician's wickedness was a planned part of his stage persona, involving rituals that blurred the line between performance and genuine evil. 4. Gaal. Now we venture into the extreme world of Norwegian black metal, a genre known for its dark themes and shocking imagery. One of its most fearsome figures is a man who goes by the name Gal, pronounced Gaul, from the band Gorgoroth. He wasn't just playing a character on stage. His real life was just as intense and frightening. Gal was known for his terrifying stage presence, often standing completely still and staring into the crowd with menacing eyes. But what many overlooked is that his scary reputation was backed up by real-life actions. He was involved in some very dark situations that landed him in serious trouble with the law. In 2004, a man accused Gal of doing something truly awful. The man claimed that during a party, Gal held him for hours, torturing him and collecting his blood in a cup. He even threatened to make the man drink it. It was a horrifying story of cruelty. For this incident, Gal was found guilty of extreme assault and was sentenced to 14 months in prison. This wasn't just about music. It was about a person who seemed to enjoy inflicting pain and fear on others, making him one of the most genuinely scary figures in all of music. Gal's cruelty was directed at one person in a terrifying, personal way. But our next star's bizarre actions were much more public, involving shocking disrespect for animals in front of huge audiences. 5. Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne is known as the Prince of Darkness, a title he earned as the lead singer of the pioneering heavy metal band Black Sabbath. He's also famous for being a lovable, bumbling character from his family's reality TV show. But not all things are what they seem. Long before he was a reality TV dad, Ozzy built a reputation for some of the most shocking onstage behavior in rock history. Two stories in particular stand out, and both involve incredible cruelty to animals. The first happened at a record company meeting. The plan was for Ozzy to release 2 doves as a sign of peace. Instead, in a moment of madness, he grabbed one of the doves and bit its head off right there in the boardroom. The executives were horrified, but that was just the beginning. The thing nobody tells you is that a similar, even more famous incident happened live on stage. During a concert, a fan threw what Ozzy thought was a rubber bat onto the stage. As a joke, he picked it up and bit its head off. It wasn't until he felt the warm liquid in his mouth that he realized it was a real live bat. It was a gruesome act that cemented his wild reputation, but it also showed a stunning lack of respect for living creatures. Ozzy's public acts were shocking, but our next musician's bad behavior was more private, tearing his own family and band apart with his terrible temper and selfish choices. 6. David Crosby. From the wild world of heavy metal, we move to the peaceful, harmony-filled sounds of the 1960s folk rock scene. David Crosby, a founding member of both the Byrds and Crosby, Stills and Nash, was known for his beautiful voice and songwriting. He was a key figure in the peace and love generation. But behind that gentle music was a man who could be incredibly difficult and hurtful. You see, his bandmates have told stories for years about his massive ego and terrible temper. He was known for starting fights and creating a toxic atmosphere, but his bad behavior went far beyond just being difficult to work with. What many overlooked were his personal failings, especially as a father. David Crosby had a son that he gave up for adoption. For years, he had no contact with him. While that can be a complicated issue, his other actions showed a pattern of neglect. He also struggled for decades with a powerful addiction to harmful substances, a habit that he seemed to enable in those around him, including his partners. His fellow band member Graham Nash once said that Crosby had been terrible to him for years, showing that the man who sang about peace and love often created chaos and pain in his own life. Crosby hurt the people closest to him with his attitude. But what about a rock star whose violent actions were so extreme that they led directly to the end of his girlfriend's life? 7. Sid Vicious. The S-Pistols were the pioneers of punk rock in the late 1970s. Their music was loud, angry, and rebellious. The face of that rebellion was their bass player, Sid Vicious. He wasn't a great musician, but he had the perfect punk look and a don't-care attitude that fans loved. His relationship with his American girlfriend, Nancy Spungen, was legendary for being a chaotic downward spiral. Their life together was a mess, and it came to a tragic end in October 1978 at the famous Chelsea Hotel in New York City. To put it mildly, what happened in room 100 is still a mystery. Nancy Spungen was found on the bathroom floor, gone from this world. She had suffered a single, deep wound to her stomach. The main person of interest was Sid. He was found wandering the halls in a daze and was arrested. He gave conflicting stories, first saying he did it, and then saying he couldn't remember. Here's a wow factor. The blade believed to have been used was one he had purchased just a few days earlier. Before he could ever stand trial and the world could find out the truth, Sid's own life came to an end from a powerful overdose while he was out on bail. The question of what really happened to Nancy remains one of rock and roll's darkest unanswered questions. Sid Vicious was accused of a terrible act of violence, but our next rock and roll pioneer was found guilty of a different kind of wickedness, using technology to secretly spy on unsuspecting women. 8. Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry is one of the founding fathers of rock and roll. Without him, there would be no Beatles, no Rolling Stones, and no modern rock music. His songs like Johnny B. Good and Maybelline are timeless classics. He was celebrated as a genius and a true original, but not all things are what they seem. And this musical hero had a very creepy and disturbing side. In 1989, a shocking secret was revealed about a restaurant Chuck Berry owned in Missouri. The thing nobody tells you is that he had installed a hidden video camera in the ladies' restroom. He wasn't just peeking, he was recording women and girls in their most private moments. This wasn't just an accusation, it was proven to be true. When the police investigated, they found videotapes containing hours of footage of unsuspecting patrons. It was a massive violation of privacy. What many overlooked is that this wasn't his first run-in with the law. He had a history of troubling behavior going back decades, including a conviction for transporting a 14-year-old girl across state lines for immoral purposes. This hidden, creepy behavior stains the legacy of one of music's most important figures. Chuck Berry's secret hobby was a gross violation, but our next artist made his violations and shocking behavior a core part of his public act, becoming the most extreme performer in rock history. 9. G.G. Allin. Some performers push the boundaries of good taste. Then there's G.G. Allin, a punk rocker who didn't just push the boundaries, he destroyed them completely. He is widely considered the most shocking and controversial frontman of all time. His live shows weren't really concerts, they were chaotic and dangerous events. You see, G.G. Allin was famous for his outrageous and disgusting actions on stage. He would frequently get into violent fights with the audience, throwing things and physically attacking people who came to see him perform. He would also harm himself, cutting himself with broken bottles and smashing his head with the microphone until he was bleeding. His goal was to make rock and roll dangerous again, but his actions went beyond performance art. He was arrested over 50 times for his behavior. To put it mildly, his shows were a public menace. The story of his life came to an end in 1993. After a particularly chaotic show in New York City where he caused a riot, he went to a party and passed away from a reaction to illegal substances. Even in his final moments, his shocking image was on display as partygoers who didn't realize he was gone posed for photos with his body. G.G. Allin's life was a performance of pure chaos. But our next star's evil was much more personal and cruel, inflicting years of torment on his famous wife behind closed doors. 10. Ike Turner. Ike Turner was a brilliant musician and a true pioneer of rock and soul music. In the 1950s, he was at the forefront of a new sound. Later, he and his wife, Tina Turner, became a world-famous duo known for their incredible energy and hit songs. Ike was the musical mastermind, but he was also a monster. For years, the public saw Ike and Tina as a powerful team. But the thing nobody tells you is that behind the curtain, Ike was subjecting Tina to years of horrific abuse. Their marriage was a nightmare of his making. Tina later revealed in her book that Ike controlled every aspect of her life and subjected her to constant, brutal beatings. The abuse was both physical and emotional. He would hurt her before she went on stage, leaving her bruised and in pain as she had to perform for cheering crowds. The situation became so unbearable that it led Tina to a moment of deep despair where she tried to end her own life. Eventually, in a legendary act of courage, she finally escaped him with only 36 cents in her pocket, leaving everything behind to start a new life. While Ike Turner was a musical genius, his legacy is forever defined by his cruelty. Ike Turner's story is one of terrible domestic torment. Our next musician's dark story is similar, involving marriage to a close relative who was just a child, a secret he tried to hide from the world. 11. Jerry Lee Lewis. Jerry Lee Lewis, known as the Killer, was one of rock and roll's original wild men. He stormed onto the scene in the 1950s with his electrifying piano playing and rebellious energy on songs like Great Balls of Fire. He was on track to be as big as Elvis Presley. But his career came to a sudden and screeching halt because of a shocking personal secret. In 1957, while on tour in England, a reporter discovered something scandalous about the woman Jerry Lee had brought with him. He introduced her as his wife, Myra Gale Brown. The problem was, she wasn't just his wife, she was also his first cousin, once removed. And here's the biggest shock of all. She was only 13 years old. Jerry Lee himself was 22. The news created a massive firestorm. The public was absolutely disgusted. The tour was canceled, he was blacklisted from the radio, and his career, which had been soaring, crashed and burned overnight. What many overlooked is the pressure Myra was under. She was just a child caught in an adult world, and the scandal changed her life forever. Though Jerry Lee Lewis eventually made a comeback, this dark chapter always loomed over his legacy. Jerry Lee Lewis's secret marriage was a scandal, but what if a rock star didn't just have a questionable relationship, but actually got legal guardianship over a teenager just to control her? 12. Ted Nugent. Ted Nugent, the Motor City Madman, is famous for his high-energy guitar playing and his outspoken, tough guy personality. He's known for his love of hunting and his strong political views. But back in the 1970s, at the height of his rock stardom, he was involved in a situation that is deeply disturbing. You see, Ted Nugent began a relationship with a young girl named Pele Massa. He was a rock star in his late 20s, and she was only 17 years old. Because she was not yet an adult, their relationship created legal problems. So, Ted Nugent did something truly unbelievable. He went to court and legally became her guardian. This meant that he, as her romantic partner, was also her legal parent figure. To put it mildly, this was a bizarre and creepy arrangement that allowed him to control her life and take her on tour with him. Beyond this strange relationship, Nugent has also bragged about how he avoided being drafted for the Vietnam War by stopping all personal hygiene for a month and acting erratically to fail his physical exam. His history is filled with controversial actions that go far beyond his music. Ted Nugent's legal maneuver was shocking. But our next rock god story is even more chilling, involving a 14-year-old girl who was taken from her home to live a life on the road. 13. Jimmy Page. Led Zeppelin is one of the biggest and most legendary rock bands of all time. Their guitarist, Jimmy Page, is considered a musical god, a mysterious and brilliant figure who created some of rock's most iconic riffs. But behind his genius was a dark side, particularly concerning his relationships. The most infamous of these was with a young girl named Lori Maddox. Lori was a baby groupie, one of the young fans who hung around the rock scene in Los Angeles in the 1970s. The thing nobody tells you is just how young she was when she got involved with Jimmy Page. He was a global superstar in his late 20s. She was only 14 years old. According to Lori Maddox's own accounts, Page had his tour manager essentially kidnap her and bring her to him. She was kept with him on the road, hidden away in hotel rooms. It was a situation where a powerful, famous adult took a child and controlled her life. It's a shocking story that was an open secret in the rock world for years. It's a stark reminder that behind the stairway to heaven, there were some very dark and bold, disturbing realities. The story of Jimmy Page and Lori Mattix is one of power and control. But our next rock star used his influence to do something similar to a teenage girl, a story that was hidden for decades. 14. Steven Tyler. Aerosmith, often called America's greatest rock and roll band, has been on top of the music world for over 50 years. Their charismatic frontman, Steven Tyler, is known for his incredible voice, wild stage presence, and colorful scarves. But a story from his past, revealed in the band's own autobiography, paints a very dark picture. In the 1970s, a young girl named Julia Holcomb was a fan of the band. When she was just 16 years old, she began a relationship with Steven Tyler, who was then in his mid-20s. Because she was so young, her parents were not happy about her being with a rock star. So Steven Tyler did something stunning. He convinced her parents to sign over guardianship of their daughter to him. This meant that he, her much older romantic partner, was now her legal guardian. This allowed him to take her on tour and live with him without her parents' consent. The relationship continued, and Julia became pregnant. Tyler then convinced her to undergo a procedure to end the pregnancy, an event that she said left her deeply traumatized. It's a chilling story of a famous adult using his power to control and manipulate a teenager. Steven Tyler's manipulation of a young fan is awful. But what about a father who inflicted years of unimaginable horror on his own daughter? 15. John Phillips. The mamas and the papas were the sunny, golden sound of the 1960s California dream. Their beautiful harmonies on songs like California Dreamin' made them icons of the hippie generation. The group's leader and main songwriter was John Phillips. He was seen as a brilliant but complicated musical figure. Many years later, his daughter, Mackenzie Phillips, who was a famous actress on the TV show One Day at a Time, revealed a horrifying family secret in her memoir. It was a secret so dark it shocked the world. She wrote that her own father, John Phillips, had forced her into an intimate physical relationship that lasted for 10 years. According to Mackenzie, this terrible violation began on the night of her first wedding when she was just 19 years old. She described a long and twisted nightmare that was a complete betrayal of a father's duty to protect his child. It's one of the most sickening stories in the history of pop culture, turning the man who wrote about innocent dreams into the figure of a real-life monster. The story of John Phillips is one of profound betrayal. Our next story also involves betrayal, but this time it's between bandmates, where one musician used the tragic end of his friend's life for his own twisted gain. 16. Euronymous. We return to the dark and icy world of Norwegian black metal with the band Mayhem, a group that lived up to its name. Their guitarist, who called himself Euronymous, pronounced Euronymous, was the scene's central figure and a self-proclaimed devil worshiper. He wanted to create the most evil music in the world, and he encouraged his bandmates to live up to that image. The band's singer, Banger, known as Dead, was a deeply troubled young man obsessed with the end of life. In 1991, he acted on these dark thoughts and ended his own life in a house he shared with the band. What Euronymous did next is beyond belief. Instead of calling for help, the first thing he did was go to a store, buy a disposable camera, and return to take graphic pictures of his deceased friend. But it gets even worse. The thing nobody tells you is that he also collected pieces of his friend's shattered skull. He then reportedly took these fragments and made them into necklaces, which he gave to other musicians in the black metal scene whom he considered worthy. It was a disgusting act of disrespect that showed a complete lack of humanity, all for the sake of building his evil reputation. Euronymous' actions after his friend's passing were ghoulish, but he would soon meet his own violent end at the hands of another musician on our list, a man known for burning down historic buildings. 17. Varg Vikernes. The story of Norwegian black metal gets even darker with Varg Vikernes, pronounced Varg Vikernes, the man behind the one-man band Burzum. He was a close associate of Euronymous and a key figure in the scene, but he wasn't content with just making music. He wanted to take their anti-establishment ideas to the extreme. In the early 1990s, a series of historic wooden churches in Norway, some of them hundreds of years old, were burned to the ground. Varg Vikernes was the main person responsible for these acts of arson. He saw it as an attack on Christianity and a way to bring back Norway's old pagan traditions. It was an act of cultural destruction that shocked the nation. But his evil deeds didn't stop there. His relationship with his former friend Euronymous had soured. In 1993, Varg drove to Euronymous' apartment in Oslo. An argument broke out, and it ended with Varg taking Euronymous' life, stabbing him 23 times. For the arsons and the ending of a life, Varg was sentenced to 21 years in prison, the maximum sentence in Norway. He became a symbol of how a dark music scene could spill over into real-world violence and wickedness. Varg Vikernes' crimes of arson and taking a life are horrific. But what if a star's evil was directed at the most vulnerable, at children, and he was able to hide it for decades behind a persona of fun and glitter? 18. Ian Watkins. In the early 2000s, the Welsh rock band Lost Prophets was huge. They sold millions of albums and had fans all over the world. Their lead singer, Ian Watkins, was a charismatic frontman, adored by his followers. But behind his rock star smile, he was hiding a secret life of unimaginable evil, a life that made him one of the most wicked criminals in modern history. In 2013, the world was horrified to learn the truth about Ian Watkins. He was not just a rock star, he was a monster who committed some of the worst crimes imaginable against children. The details are too disturbing to go into fully, but they involve doing terrible things to babies and young kids and recording his vile acts. When the police finally caught him, they uncovered a mountain of evidence of his depravity. The case was so shocking that it made headlines around the globe. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison for his heinous crimes. His bandmates were completely unaware of his secret life and were devastated, immediately breaking up the band. His actions were a betrayal of everyone who ever looked up to him, and a horrifying example of pure evil hiding in plain sight. Ian Watkins's crimes are sickening. Our next star, from a much earlier era, also preyed on young people around the world, using his fame to commit horrible acts for decades. 19. Gary Glitter. Gary Glitter was a massive star in the 1970s glam rock era in Britain. With his flashy costumes, platform boots, and catchy stadium anthems like Rock and Roll Part 2, he was a household name. His music is still played at sporting events around the world, often by people who have no idea about the monster who created it. For decades, Gary Glitter, whose real name is Paul Gadd, used his fame and fortune to travel the world and abuse children. His evil acts were not a one-time mistake, they were a lifelong pattern of behavior. He was investigated for possessing terrible images of children in the 1990s. Later, he fled to places like Cambodia and Vietnam, where he continued to harm young girls. He was eventually caught and sent to prison in Vietnam. After his release, he was sent back to the UK, where he finally had to face justice for more of his crimes. In 2015, he was found guilty of numerous offenses against 3 young girls, some of whom were as young as 8 years old at the time of the abuse. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison, finally putting an end to his long and disgusting career of hurting the innocent. Gary Glitter's evil spanned decades and continents. But our #1 spot goes to a musical genius who created timeless classics, yet ended his life in prison after taking the life of a talented actress in his own home. 20. Phil Spector. Phil Spector was one of the most important and influential figures in the history of popular music. As a producer in the 1960s, he created the Wall of Sound, a revolutionary recording technique that changed music forever. He worked with legends like the Beatles, Tina Turner, and the Ramones. He was a true genius, but he was also a deeply disturbed and dangerous man. Spector was known for his eccentric and paranoid behavior. He had a strange obsession with weapons and would often intimidate musicians in the studio by brandishing firearms. For years, people in the music industry knew he was unstable, but his darkness fully came to light on a tragic night in 2003. Actress named Lana Clarkson went home with Spector to his strange, castle-like mansion in California. In the early hours of the morning, she was found gone from this world, slumped in a chair with a single gunshot wound. Spector claimed she had ended her own life, but the evidence told a different story. After 2 trials, the music legend was found guilty of ending her life. The man who created some of the most beautiful love songs in history was revealed to be a cold-blooded life-taker, and he spent the rest of his days in prison, where he passed away in 2021.